Welcome to all our listeners. Ubuntunomics is a weekly roundup and discussion of the most important economic and political developments from Africa. Hosted by myself, Sia from PESA. PESA is a political economy think tank that promotes regional integration in SADC and provides research on the political economy of development in Africa. With me is my co-host, Sbu Nyati from Isakombe Assets. Isakombe Assets provides individuals with renewable energy assets in order to develop communities.
Hi, Sbu. How are you?
Hi, Sia. I'm fine, thank you, man. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. What do you have for us in store today?
On South African Stories today, my first story is about the Social Distress Relief Grant, which comes to an end at the end of the month. The Social Distress Relief Grant, announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic last year, as a measure to stave off hunger for the poor millions, comes to an end on the 30th of April 2021. There have been calls to turn the 350 Rand grant into a universal basic income.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I've seen some of the calls that went out from non-governmental organizations and even some of the recipients who were being interviewed in media engagements this week. Do you know how many people have benefited from this grant?
The Department of Social Development says about 6 million beneficiaries received this grant on a monthly basis. The department has spent over 17 billion, it says, thus far.
Wow, that's interesting. And I think that's just under half of the free education budget from a few years back, which was estimated at around 50 billion Rand per annum. And how do we feel about this social welfare grant from the point of view of Ubuntunomics and how we would view this welfare?
I think South Africa is turning into a welfare state. I much prefer jobs because we are not a rich country, not in the mold of the Scandinavian countries, which have big social which have big sovereign wealth funds and large natural gas reserves. South Africa would have to industrialize much quicker and employ all those millions of people, because manufacturing provides an opportunity to employ many low-skilled workers. On the other hand, South Africa also has free education, or let me say subsidized education, up to higher, tertiary level education. So we have a bit of welfareism, but going the whole hog with a universal basic income, I think is just stretching it a bit too far.
Sure. And look, from my point of view, I think there's just certain ways in which welfare can be constructed. I think people still have the need to feel and to be contributing to society. And I think a grant that is a no obligation welfare approach definitely does more harm than good. For example, alternatives, as in the case of Rwanda, where grant recipients are actually required to clean the streets of Kigali in order to prove that they've done their social contribution before receiving their grants, seems to me as a much more sustainable and effective alternative than just providing money. But you know, all the constraints in creating jobs, etc., also don't make it easy for government to create jobs. And you know, the government's capacity to create jobs comes at question at every corner. But I think really what we're facing in the South African economy is a larger problem. You know, there's always been this issue of a chicken and an egg debate around whether investment comes first or whether demand comes first in order to attract investment. And it seems as though the common economic theory that public investment leads private investment and attracts it is not actually the reality in South Africa, because we've seen government being a strongest contributor towards gross fixed capital formation in the economy, yet at the same time, our private sector is not playing as big a role as it could be. I mean, there have been a number of studies that prove anything from cash hoarding, as was the case with the UJ competition, cred research, or they're either expatriating the money to invest in other countries abroad, as we've seen in the statistics, which South Africa now ranks amongst the top 5 sources for foreign direct investment, despite having such slow growth and high unemployment domestically. So for me, it seems as though a large part of the puzzle is how do we get private sector to play the game and invest in the economy. And I think we should have that debate on another day, because you know, those are the kinds of debates that could go on for hours. Maybe take us to your next story this week.
Yes, my next story is about the chaotic scenes outside the Piet Retief Magistrate's Court on Monday when 4 suspects appeared in connection with the killing of 2 siblings earlier in the month. Brothers Zenzele and Amos Toka were shot dead when they came looking for seasonal work. Farm killings and racism still plague rural South Africa, where the rural economy has not been able to cater for competing needs. That's my second story, a gory story. 2 brothers
That's a
killed.
very sad one indeed. But how do we reconcile this with the campaign that paints farmers as the victims of farm killings? Here we have a clear case, and not the first, one of many, where farmers have died at the hands, where farm workers have died at the hands of farmers. So what can we say is actually happening in South African farms?
What is happening in reality is that more farm workers, or let me say black people, are victims of violent crime in rural South Africa than white farm owners. But when white farm owners get killed, there is a media frenzy with organizations like AgriForum or farmer organizations like Arau and all those. They dispense dollops of scaremongering propaganda, claiming that South Africa will be the next Zimbabwe. The failure to resolve the long-standing land question is another problem, because it results in this kind of talk. In order to shut down debate, the people, those who have the land, who own the land currently, would say South Africa might subject itself to food insecurity if whenever this topic is brought about. But land reform is not just about farmland, but it's about all forms of wealth creation. Think home owning, think about mortgage bonds, think about real estate, think about industrial and commercial property. It's the land question in South Africa, which links to what we were talking about previously, industrialization, manufacturing, the productive side of the economy. It all links with the land, and South Africa, unless South Africa, up until South Africa solves this land reform, there will be these killings, there will be this animosity between the races. It's one of those, the original sin, as President Ramaphosa calls it, that has to be resolved. Yeah.
That's an interesting one, and I think points to the larger matter or problem of market failure in South Africa, and that we seem to have a market failure built around racist ideology. And that's creating
Yes.
adverse relationships between employers and workers. You know, the agricultural sector as well as the mining sector are two of what South Africa has considered their sunset clauses, as President Ramaphosa puts it, and our National Development Plan puts it. But also, these are sectors where you literally have workers dying at the behest of employers. If you think back to
Yes.
2012 Marikana saga and the massacre took place in the mining sector, if you think of the 2012 and even earlier raids and fights that took place in the Dwurns, which spread to other areas, and even these killings, which are not only happening in Mpumalanga, but also parts of Newcastle in KwaZulu-Natal and parts of the Free State in Senegal. And it's
Yes.
to show that there's a unique type of market failure in South Africa that's linked to our racist and racism legacy of apartheid. But I guess that's a debate for another day. Let's move along
Another
to the
one of
next
those.
story.
Yes, another one of those here. Our next story is about the Public Service Coordinating Bargaining Council. The government and trade unions are locked in negotiations over salary increases and terms of employment. Excuse me. For the 2021 and 2022 financial year, the Department of Public Service and Administration formally tabled a proposal not to increase salaries, while the unions proposed an increase of more than 7%. That would be consumer inflation plus 4%. That's a sticky one there. Yeah.
Definitely. Do we know what the government has agreed to initially in the public sector bargaining council? Obviously, in that council, government agrees with workers on a multi-year wage bargaining agreement. And obviously, this started last year, government reneging on that. But what were they supposed to pay according to that agreement?
The 3-year salary agreement entered into between government and trade unions in 2018 was meant to have ended in 2020 last year, and it proposed increases of between 4.4 and 5.4% for public servants, depending obviously on their pay scales. But since 2020 last year until now, this is the second year in a row where there has been a salary freeze for the entire 1.3 million public service. So the government reneged, as you said, on the agreement, and trade unions are taking the government to court as we speak to ask the courts to compel the states to honor that 2018 agreement.
Very, very interesting indeed. And obviously, some trade unions have threatened to shut down public services if government doesn't provide the increases necessary. This, again, obviously takes me back to the period 2014-2016, where Pretoria was repeatedly shut down due to public sector strikes over wages. And I do think that although government was able to get away with this zero fee increase last year, due to a number of people losing their jobs during the pandemic and people being fearful of losing their jobs, in this instance, there also are other push factors which will push people to advocate for a higher increase, such as the 15.2 increase in electricity tariffs, the additional increase in fuel caused by the increase on the fuel levy following this year's budget in February, which last year were not major concerns. And obviously, with these energy and fuel price increases, we also expect inflation to rise. And as a result, people will definitely be losing quite a strong or considerable amount of their bargaining power. Hence, we expect them to push back more strongly against the government. So I think the government really has no opportunity to evade that agreement at this point. But maybe take us to your next story.
Okay, I was just about to say on this last story, last point here is that Our CPIX is at about 6 to 7%, but this year it's at about 3%. But when you look at the cost of transportation, most studies say it is at around about 20%, and food inflation in South Africa is between 15 to 20%. So the 3% plus 4% increment, that is the consumer inflation plus a little bit more, is not adequate enough. But then we'll discuss that on another day. My next and last story for this week is about the ANC veteran Tokyo Sexwale, who made bizarre claims on national TV last Sunday. He was saying that billions meant for causes such as the COVID-19 relief, social grants, or grants for free education were stolen at the Reserve Bank. National Treasury and the South African Reserve Bank dismissed the claims, saying the businessmen had fallen victim of a scam. It's a bizarre story. It's a bizarre story, if you ask
Very,
me.
very bizarre indeed. And I'm not sure whether it is an expose of internal shenanigans in the ANC or whether he's just should be embarrassingly showing off how he was a victim of a 419 scam. What is actually going on with the story?
I mean, this guy is someone we should be taking seriously because he is one of the contenders for the ANC presidency, or even president of South Africa if he gets that post. But today he had a briefing with the media at 2 p.m. And he was trying to explain this story to give more information, but we were left with nothing because many questions remain unanswered. Like, how likely is it that an individual family or business could afford the quantum of funding required for the projects he was claiming where they were going to be funded? Because he was talking about things like smart cities, bullet trains, and increasing the COVID-19 social relief fund. I mean, social relief grant from the 350 rand to 2,700 rands each person per month. That is hundreds of billions, in fact, into the trillions. So it's a very bizarre story because the man fails. He fails today to come up with a mandate letter, just as proof of the transfer of these large sums of funds he was talking about. I mean, at SARS, at the SARB, South African Reserve Bank, you can own. There are strict conditions regarding the embargo of funds. And yesterday, the South African Reserve Bank and the National Treasury issued a joint statement saying that this whole affair was a scam. Now the onus is on Comrade Tokyo Sexwale to provide proof and evidence for his claims. Yeah, very interesting.
Very interesting. Let's watch and see how that develops. And,
Exactly.
on that note, let me take you through the stories from the rest of Africa this week. Ubuntunomics shares condolences with all Chadians and the family of His Excellency Idriss Déby Itno, the President of the Republic of Chad since 1990, who died from injuries sustained in clashes with rebels in northern Chad over the past weekend. Former President Déby will be fondly remembered for his significant contributions to regional stability, particularly as part of efforts to combat terrorism, violent extremism, and organized crime in the Sahel. His son, four-star General Muhammad Idriss Déby, succeeded him on Tuesday, 20th April, following his nomination by a transitional military council.
Oh, from father to son. I've never heard of General Muhammad Déby before. What kind of a man is he? I wonder. When do they envisage going back to civilian rule again?
Sure. Muhammad is now in charge of a 15-member transitional military council that will be in power for the next 18 months. He has a reputation for discretion and shunning the limelight, unlike some of his brothers. However, he is also a battle-hardened soldier, just like his father. Muhammad, aged 37, is the same age as late Déby when he took over power through a military coup in 1990. And I guess, as it runs through from father to son, it seems as though we're back at the beginning in full circle all over again, as it seems as though this is another 1990 moment for Chad all over again.
It's all in the genes, bro.
Our next story is in the Southern African Development Community. The new ambassador of the People's Republic of China to Botswana and a special representative to the SADC region, His Excellency Ambassador Wang Shufang, has reiterated China's commitment to supporting the SADC region in pursuit of regional peace, security, and development agenda. His Excellency Ambassador Wang made commitments on the 16th of April when he presented his letter of credence to the SADC Executive Secretary, Her Excellency Dr. Stigomina Lawrence Tax at the SADC Secretariat. In charting the future of development cooperation between SADC and China, the two parties agreed to operationalize the SADC-China framework for cooperation.
I wonder what kind of development agenda this is. Is it more loans, as in the case with Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, and Egypt? Please tell us here, is China looking to put men and equipment on the ground, or are they simply going to offer financial support?
Well, at this point, it's not clear, and I would probably hazard a guess that it's a combination of these. Given that in 2018, China committed to support the Southern African Development Community with construction of a regional logistics depot in Botswana for the bloc's standby force. The regional logistics depot would be built in Rasisa in Botswana, and when complete, would house general purpose equipment for the military, police, and civilian components of the SADC standby force. According to SADC, the depot is part of the standby force to support regional peace operations under the African Union Standby Force Policy Framework, and it would facilitate storage of material, equipment, and end-user stocks to ensure readily available logistics support when needed. And the aim is to provide stocks on a just-in-time basis to meet the rapid deployment capability of the SADC standby force to support regional peace operations. And that was the last project that came out of the China SADC cooperation. So I'm not sure how far this project is in terms of construction and whether or not it has really started in terms of construction, but it seems as though the kind of cooperation that China will be going for is this mix of financing and people on the ground, obviously to also take care of some of its interests in the region, given that China has invested significantly in a number of economies, or borrowed or lent, to a number of governments in the region.
We are blessed in the region. We have AFRICOM in Swaziland, and now China is making a play. Interesting.
It's very, very interesting. Obviously, a lot of these countries have been taken aback by the insurgents in northern Mozambique, and there are fears that that insurgency could definitely affect stability throughout the SADC region, which for the most part, in comparison to the rest of Africa, has been a peaceful region, if you exclude the ongoing, long-standing crisis of violence in eastern DRC. Our next story is about the SADC Secretariat, in partnership with the German development agency GIZ, has piloted a project to align regional and national aquaculture strategic frameworks in the region. This is aimed at strengthening national and regional linkages towards achieving regional integration objectives within the context of sustainable aquaculture development in 3 pilot countries, Botswana, Malawi, and Namibia. By investing in aquaculture, SADC member states are able to leverage the benefits of regional agriculture and agro-processing value chains, access to international markets, and pool resources to achieve economies of scale.
You talk of markets. The 3 countries you mentioned, Botswana, Malawi, and Namibia, have relatively small populations. I wonder what South Africa's role will be in the partnership. Are they maybe thinking of possible regional market in South Africa, perhaps, or do they? Or what do you think how will this tie in with South Africa's Oceans Economy Program? Or does this project involve access perhaps to European markets? What's the deal with with markets on this one?
So there doesn't seem to be a focus on international markets, as this is seen as separate from the issue of aligning regional and national policies. And also South Africa is not involved in this pilot. But the idea is that the lessons learned from the pilots and success stories would be able to be shared amongst participating member states in order to replicate the initiatives all over the SADC region. Really, I think the idea here is about aligning national and regional policy in order to make sure that these projects are taking off in the different countries. And the idea is that those projects will create a learning or an experience that can be replicated in other countries in the region as well. And the next
I
story
see.
is the African Union and the United Nations and international partners have welcomed significant progress towards achieving an inclusive and comprehensive political solution in Libya. The UN has been supporting peace efforts in Libya, which descended into chaos and conflict following the overthrow of President Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, resulting in the country being divided between the internationally recognized Government of National Accord, the GNA, and the rival Libyan National Army, the LNA. Mediation facilitated by the UN led to a historic ceasefire agreement signed last October by military representatives from each side, known as the 5x5 or 5+5 Joint Military Commission, the JMC. And a new interim unity government was sworn in last month, which is paving the way to political dialogue and a roadmap that includes elections by December 2021.
Sounds like good news for Libya. That country,
Certainly.
the people must be war fatigued by now. I want what of the Islamist insurgents to the south of the country? Is this solution? Do they form part of this solution, or do you think the peace effort will last if they're not part of this solution?
So it seems as though the approach on international partners and the UN with regards to not just Libya, but other countries in the Sahel region is to look at it from a regional point of view. Although they're targeting a few countries and supporting intervention in those countries, such as Libya, Chad, Mali, and other Sahel countries, the security working group has issued a renewed call on all parties to accelerate implementation of the ceasefire, particularly the opening of the coastal road between Abu Ghraib and Sirte, as well as the immediate repatriation of foreign fighters and mercenaries. For now, it seems as though the focus is on Sahel safety as a region, but through these national key points. So I do believe that this agreement is a step forward towards stability in Libya. And I think if achieved, will be able to create quite a considerable balance of power in stabilizing the Sahel region. But obviously, with the recent passing of Chadian President Idriss Déby, as we've discussed earlier, there is a level of power vacuum caused by this death, and a lot will depend on how his son takes over power and whether or not the Chadian defense forces are able to control or get the rebel forces under control, or at least agree to a ceasefire that would see to a political rather than military solution to the conflict in that country. But obviously, again, this is just one of a number of countries in the Sahel region that are the focus of the UN Security Council and international development partners.
Okay. All right.
So our last story today, the African Union Commission Chairperson Moussa Faki Mahamat commended the extensive fact-finding report on the role of France in the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. The report was commissioned by the government of Rwanda in 2017 from the law firm of Levi Firestone Muse LLP, following the Duclair report commissioned by the French government, which found that France bore a heavy and overwhelming responsibility in the 1994 Rwandan genocide.
I must have watched a lot of Hotel Rwanda because I always thought it was the Belgians who were responsible. But what is France? What were their response to the findings?
Sure. You might remember that in 2019, Macron ordered the creation of a commission to analyze France's role in Rwanda from 1990 to 94 through archival research. And France most notably led the Operation Turquoise, a military humanitarian intervention launched by Paris under the UN mandate between June and August of 94. And critics believe that it was in reality aimed at supporting the genocidal Hutu government. And there have been repeated accusations that authorities in Paris helped suspects in the Rwandan genocide to escape while under French military protection. And that report has been submitted to Macron, who has taken tentative steps to come to terms with the once taboo aspect of the country's historical record. And I think this is all part of Macron's review, or you might think of the Macron Commission on France-Afrique, which he pledged when he came into power, stating that he wants to change the relations between France and its former colonies on the continent. But in reality, we've seen very little difference. And instead, we've seen France actually strengthening its position. If you think of the Central or the West African Francophone or CFA Franc Zone member states, who at some stage last year wanted to create their own currency, the ECHO, to replace the regional CFA franc in West Africa, which I think has now been overtaken by events and the COVID pandemic. But it suffices to say that since Macron took over power, very little has changed by way of diplomatic or relations between France and its former colonies on the continent. And obviously these reports exposing quite a gruesome and instigating role that France played in this genocide, which we're still feeling the effects of up until today.
Really interesting. Okay, so interesting story.
And that note, that brings an end to our episode. Until next week.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye.